On this video, we're back on the 69 Charger. If you watched the last video, you saw on this car, we gutted pretty much the whole car and all the panels we're not keeping. It's been put on the frame jig, so it's structurally sound. We now have it outside. We also got all the undercoat off because the Sandblaster won't remove it. At this point, if you're doing this at home, either you could hire a Sandblaster right now at this point. I haven't found anyone that hasn't messed up the cars more than they helped it. That's not saying there's some great sandblasters out there, but sometimes it's easier for me to do it myself. So we got a Harbor Freight blaster that I've upgraded, and I have a pretty good compressor with an air dryer on it, which makes it easier. But if you're at home, you can do this. Take it in an hour interval at a time, use a good little water separator and empty it out regularly. But what we're gonna do, we got the car sitting here, we have it opened up. So at this point, we can get inside the outer rockers. Where we remove the inner rockers, we could get inside all the crevices. That's why we're blasting now and not initially when the car came. So let's look at the blaster we're gonna use. Like I said, it's just a Northern tool. It's an ALC 100-pound pot blaster. It's real simple. I got a Mary Blast conversion on it. It's just for me doing these larger jobs. It's easier. I really like the ball valves on the edge where I could just open it up instead of just squeezing the trigger the whole time. What we also got, the feed changes on it. If you look down here, the ALC one will come out the bottom with the hose, where this one, it's got this hose and this pipe addition, and I also put a tube inside with multiple suction feet so it doesn't clog. But what you would do with this one, we'll close that main valve, is you would sit here, you pull your thing up, and like I said, you could buy this at Northern Tool. It's a great blaster, and you can upgrade it if you don't like it. I know Harbor Freight sells one. I like the kind that you could just pour the blast sand in through the top, but pressurize it. I run in my blaster about 85, 90 PSI. My compressor is hotter, so I'm not surging it. You want a consistent airflow, so you're not changing your sand rate or anything else. But what I would end up doing first, I'm gonna open that valve up when I start blasting. Obviously, we're not gonna do it right now, but that's your air inlet. So your air now is just flowing through there. I'll open this main valve up, point it at the car, and what I'll do, I'll start opening the sand valve. So that's gonna start letting the sand come flow through there. And then once I get a good spot where I feel like I'm happy on the air pressure to sand ratio, we'll leave it. One more trick that you might have to do, if you find that you have this all the way open and you're still just getting too much air and not enough sand, it rained yesterday, it's not that humid here, but sometimes if it's real humid, the sand's not flowing right, you might have to choke it out. What you're gonna do is back off this throttle with this one open. What that's gonna do, that's gonna send more pressure in the pot pushing down the sand. You're still gonna get the airflow, but it's gonna help the lift on the sand go more than the air, if that makes sense. So that's like choking your blaster. It's not like highly recommended, but it's a way, if you got to do the job, it's going to help you. The blast sand we're going to go over that we're going to be using is this premium medium bite glass sand. I also got Northern Tool. I've been using different sands I've tried, you know. This one I feel in general is a good blasting sand. Don't use, I had a blaster one time show up here, use Pulse filter sand, and he thought he's gonna save a bunch of money, and then we ended up using twice as many bags of sand. So buy the right stuff, buy something for the job you're using. I am not a believer in blasting exterior panels. We will not touch the roof of this car. We won't touch anywhere exterior that we think we're gonna warp. So that's I mean, I haven't been convinced yet. Every blaster I had that says they can do it, I'm not saying no one can't do it out there. I've had bad luck, and I'm not willing to try it on someone else's car. So if you were doing exterior structure, the owner doesn't want us to do the roof right now. He doesn't want us to do the top of the quarters. I guess he's gonna take care of that. I would have had these pre-stripped down with like an Eastwood SCT, kind of like the rockers here. If you see, I already stripped these down. I might go over them and dust them real quick just because the rockers are pretty strong, but that's what I would do. All this would be in bare metal up here, and we wouldn't blast it. And then when we're done blasting, I'll come back with a DA, put a tooth on it right before epoxy, and then we epoxy the whole car. I've done other videos on this, but right now we're just blasting the chassis. We're not touching any of the exterior body on this car. Another thing too, just get a good blast hood. I'm not a fan of just the hoods with the shield on it. This one, it's got a filtered airflow through it, and it's got 2 screens to really help you. I think if you're doing something like this, I mean, I know we're outside, but this thing really starts kicking up some sand, and you really don't want to get that in your lungs. So get a decent helmet. I mean, this isn't the most expensive out there. The Blaster's not the most expensive. We're probably going to upgrade down the road. I'm not trying to be in the blasting business. This is just for the small projects that really need it. So stay tuned. Let's start blasting, and then we'll come back and I'll show you some stuff with the epoxy primer.
So here's another look at the car as we start blasting in time lapse. You could see the amount of rust on the front end and basically what we're trying to blast off everything. That whole area, if you missed the last video, did have a bunch of undercoat. We ended up burning it off and scraping it. The Sandblaster, it will take forever. There's a couple pieces here or there that was left on it, and you actually still have to kind of hold over it and just wait and kind of pull them off at an angle to get. So if this whole thing was covered in undercoat, it would really take forever to completely blast out. You could see I just started blasting, so we're still fine-tuning the blaster and just getting it really just dialed in. Right there, I opened up the sand a little bit more. I was just running too much air pressure, not pulling enough sand out of it. The number one problem for me, and something for you to think at home, is that if you don't have a mobile blast unit, a commercial grade one with a diesel air compressor, that pretty much you're at the mercy of being stuck as far as your airlines reach. I have to run 2 airlines, so pretty much I could only go about 50, 60 feet away from the house. You can see this is not the first time I've ever blasted here. I'll clean it up, but down the road we're hoping to get a mobile unit, and we're going to blast down the road quite a bit where, you know, we just take the cars down there and we blast away. You can see right here I kind of got the sand turned up a little bit. I did choke it out after it was all said and done. You could see how much more sand is coming out of it at the pressure, even in about the same time lapse. Here we are with this is just an example of how we fill it up. Pot runs down, dump the 50-pound bag in there slowly, and then you're going to kind of have to just shake it around and pack it down a little bit tighter. Make sure you get all 50 pounds in there. Depending on how much sand you're using and how fast you're running, you're probably using about a bag of sand every 30 minutes or so. Right here is the actual speed that I'm blasting. I slowed it down just so you see about the progress we're running. This whole car and this whole project took me about 6.5 hours to run with this blaster and to get this coating off the car. Every blaster in every vehicle might be slightly different depending on the amount of paint that's on there, the amount of rust that's on there, and how good the paint was applied by previous body technicians or the factory. There's also always that compromise. If you turn more sand up, you're going to use more material, but you might save a little bit of time. So you want to find that happy median where you're blasting and you're not wasting your time in your air in the compressor, you know, and overworking that, and not just using just too much media and wasting it. So there is a happy compromise between the two. Mess around with your settings, and it's going to change on the day and probably the project. That's why these systems right here do have the ball valve adjustments in them. Here's a couple photos now of the blasting and the engine bay that's done. There's still some primer on the car. I mean, you're going to have little speckles here or there, but you see the dashboard underneath with all the rust, the before and after shots, and the big difference that came out, especially on the inner rockers and everything here with the frame rails. And then once we blast it, how clean the rockers came, and we could take our time there. Same thing with the frame rails. So all in all, the epoxy is going to seal all this up, and it's going to be a lot better. At this point, we're going to put our weld through primer on the car. I do this first now before the epoxy, and this is basically a time saving step. The epoxy is going to be real hard, and it gums up the sandpaper when you sand it down or try to use any kind of surface prep tools on it. So all in all, we're going to spray our weld through primer first everywhere we think we got to weld panels, and if you miss a spot, you could come back through and fix it. It's not the end of the world, and just sand that little area. But all in all, this little step right here is going to save us numerous amounts of cleanup and prep time down the road. Right now with this weld through primer, we're about 14 hours after we sandblasted. I got up first thing in the morning, it's the next day, sprayed the weld through primer, and then we waited about 6 hours to make sure it was completely fully dried. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back through and mask off the areas that I don't want the epoxy to spray over the weld through primer. I'm on the top and bottom of frame rails because my spot welder squeezes on both sides. I want a good contact that I know we won't be able to get through, and with a welder through the epoxy primer, no matter what welder I'm using. I also, right here, I'm using the cheapest, worst tape I could find. Now, if this was a base coat situation, we don't want the edges peeling up, and it would be a horrible idea. You'll get paint on the windows. But in this situation, if it peels up and rolls up a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. So I want a tape that I know is not going to rip up the weld through primer and pull anything off, but protect it for the most part.
We have the 69 Charger. It's all done with the sandblasting. We got the areas taped up for the most part that we don't want a primer and epoxy. If you do miss a spot, it's not that big of a deal. We're in the garage. What we're trying to do here, we got the car blown out. The idea is just get the car protected. You're not trying to do a show quality paint job. There's gonna be some sand if you've sandblasted this thing, and we're 24 hours since we sandblasted. You got about up to 72 hours to get this thing in epoxy. But what we're gonna do, we're gonna use this, this Omni MP172. A lot of people use spray cans and they pop the bottom on epoxy. The epoxy is key because the epoxy is going to seal up the bare metal and stop its water resistance so moisture can't get behind it. So it's an important step. Now, I think it's easier to use a gallon of this stuff versus, this car right here, everything you're looking at. I can't imagine that's got to be 20, 25 cans that. This stuff is expensive, but I think all in all, you're better off if you're doing a project this big, just going with a gallon, get you a spray gun. We're gonna use the Vilbis starting line, and I'll go over the gun setup in a minute when we get there, but this is pretty much everything you're gonna need to start your epoxy with a normal. What I didn't use on this car is a prep wall. Every time we handled the car from the outside till we brought it in the garage in its level spot now. So this is where the car is going to sit while we put all the parts on it from now on. It's level, it's not going to move, but we didn't touch it with bare hands. It got a grease on there. If you do, I'm not saying there might be a reason that you have to touch the car, work on something, you just grab it, just wipe it down with a little wax and grease remover. But I don't feel we have to worry about that. So before we start, we do have to agitate this. You could sit there, pop the top, use a shaker. We got different things of stirring it, little things on the drill. We have a shaker. So let's go ahead and put this in the shaker, and then we'll take it to the next step. We're back mixing up our gallon jug from the shaker. Now, what you want to do at this point, you want to open the technical data sheet, the TDS sheet on, for instance, the Omni MP170 series. They have a 170, which is a gray, a 171, which is white, I believe, and a 172 is black. But they're all going to mix the same, and it's going to tell you from your mixing ratio. For this one, it's 2 parts of this to 1 part of the catalyst, up to half a part of the acetone. I am going to thin it out with the acetone. I like the way it sprays a little better. I might not even put a full half a part, but I usually do put a touch of acetone in there just to thin it out. I think it lays nicer. So we're going to use our mixing cup. You're also going to want some lacquer thinner on hand. And actually, I got tons of lacquer thinner. So we'll go ahead and we're going to start mixing this because, for instance, the TDS says this have a 15-minute induction period, which means we have to wait 15 minutes before it actually sprays out. The TDS sheet will also tell you what grit has to be sanded before the actual epoxy would stick. And that goes for paints, it goes for base coat, clear coat, all that stuff. And it also says how many days pot life or before you can spray it and everything else. So just go through the TDS, have it on hand where you can open it and just refer back to it all the time. So let's go ahead and now we got mixed up. Open the gallon jug and we'll start mixing it. So what we're going to end up doing here is I'm really bad at math, so we're actually going to use, I said this is a 2 to 1 part to half, up to half a part acetone, which is optional. So we're actually going to go on the cup right here where it says 2 to 1 to 0.5. And I know we got a big project right here, so we're going to mix up the full cup. We're actually going to mix up 2 cups at the same time.
Here's a close-up on the cup where you see the 2 to 1 to half to 1 ratio. So the first step in this whole process would be where the blue is, you run it up to the 5, or if you're only mixing the 3, you can go to the 3s. But we're going up to the 5 on the first one, and then we go up to the 1 column, and you see we're going up to the 5 level on that column. And then on the half ratio, you see we go up to the 5 on that level. It just makes things so much easier this way.
We're going to go ahead and we'll put our pouring spout on here, so I try not to make a huge mess. So now we get our cup level. I'm going to do both of these at the same time. So we're going to mix up to the 5 on the 2 spot first. So we're right there at the 5 level on both of them. We'll put this aside, and we're probably going to have to mix up a couple batches of this stuff, just because I know this isn't going to cover the car. So a lot of times I'll have the next pot ready and being inducted while I go ahead and start spraying this one, and usually I can keep rolling along with this stuff. So this is going to be 1 part. So we got our first 5 where we mixed up there. Now we're going to the 1 level, and we'll move it up to the 5 on that point. And then the catalyst on this one is the MP175. That's the same no matter what of the 3 versions of epoxy you're going to use. Like I said, I like to put a little bit less than half a part of acetone in there. It just thins it out and it sprays nicer, like I said earlier. Probably could do a better job pouring it, but. All right, so we'll go ahead and mix this up now. Also, through this whole process, if you notice, I am using gloves. You're going to be changing gloves constantly. Make sure anytime you're painting, just get disposable gloves. Really, anytime you're handling the bare metal on these cars, any oil, grease, everything on your hands can be transferred to there. So, and we are going to mix this up more right now. I'm just kind of stirring it up. We're going to actually mix it in our cups. But as far as the gun, so what I did before, just save us time, I went and this is, like I said, the DeVilbiss starting line. It's got like a primer kind of gun and actually has a clear coat base coat gun that we'll use for smaller jobs. But I'll actually hook this up and I'll spray. You can use your primer in a normal cup like this. We use the decay cups, the disposable cups right here. It makes cleanup a little bit easier where I can just take this and throw this away. But we'll go ahead, beforehand, I'll have to take this, fill it up with some lacquer thinner after the gun's already clean, and just spray it outside to make sure the gun is clean. But the gun settings, for instance, what I'll do, I'll open my fan up, that's the top one, screw it all the way to the left, make sure it's opened up. And then what I like to do, I like to make sure this second one is how much paint's flowing. So what I like to do is bottom it out, so you're squeezing the trigger, and now you see I can't squeeze it anymore. Now we're at full, I guess, paint flow, and I like to turn this gun in 1.5 turns. And I'll start there, and if I feel like I need more paint, we'll go ahead and open it up a little bit more. If I feel like I'm making too many runs or anything, we'll have to turn it in a little bit more. And saying that, we're in the garage, we're not a paint booth. Like I said, there's gonna be sand in the car, we just blasted it, so we're not trying to do a show quality job. This is for protecting it. If you're at home, I mean, feel free to shoot this outside, do the best you can. This is a good way to learn how to paint and mess around with the gun. I mean, try to shoot it like you would a clear coat job, but for the most part, I mean, do your best on this. So let me show you the TDS sheet on this just so we're looking for, and we'll come back and we'll finish pouring this in and mix our cup.
This is just a simple Google search on your part number of whatever material you're trying to spray.
So whatever primers you use, just like I said, consult that TDS sheet. I do like the Omni because other primer epoxies I've used take longer to dry. And here I got a lot of cars, you're usually doing a lot of metal work. So really, you could be sanding on this stuff in a good hour where it's fully cured and you're not going to hurt it. So next thing we do, we got our, like I said, our disposable cups. Pour that in there. We'll take our strainer to make sure we don't get any dirt in there. Put a new strainer up there, and we'll pour straight in. All right, so we'll take that one. So it's poured up there, and that's why I mix the two cups, because on this larger cup, it'll fill right up there on this larger job. So we take our cap, put it on there, and with this adapter, what it's going to do is screw into the top of the gun. And so I like the feed that way too. So we'll go ahead, put this on there. And then right there, now our gun's shook up, and we're gonna go through our 15-minute induction period. We'll go ahead too, while we're gone, we're gonna throw some lacquer thinner in these cups, wipe them out, clean them. There's where all my old dirty paint and lacquer goes down there. So we'll clean that in the 15 minutes, and we'll go walk around the car. I wanna show you a couple more things while we're waiting for this to finish its induction period. So one more thing on the paint gun, you want to make sure you have an air water separator. I had a small one on there and a regulator. I'm usually running my PSI. It all depends on the gun, but I'm starting on this gun about 25 PSI, and I'll adjust accordingly based on the spray pattern. If you feel like it's getting too, if it's not atomizing enough, maybe turn up the air, and that might help. I also have an air dryer on it. Another thing you don't want to do, you don't want to run oils through your line. You don't want to be, oiling your tools and have the oils in line and have a chance of coming out through the paint, landing on it, because that's obviously going to contaminate everything. You're going to have a bunch of issues. So my air tools that I do use, I oil them manually at the very end every now and then. So someone had a question, and I thought it was a really good thing that I think this would be a good time to address. They was asking, how do we go ahead and make sure we get the car and we get paint and protection in between frame rails of these cars and areas we can't see? The short answer to that is we can't. In this shop, we do the best we can. At home, you do the best you can. I'm also kind of bound by the constraints of the customer. There are certain parts about this car and other cars, even the one next to us, that if I was doing this Charger and it was my car, personally, I would probably do it different ways. And it's kind of hard to put out some of the videos knowing that that's not exactly how I would do it. Not that the owner's wrong, but for instance, if this is my Charger, I would sit there and these quarters would be off this car. He's talking about maybe putting quarter skins. We're still kind of going back and forth on that, but you could see, I'll show you a picture right now of up in that car, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
We're inside the quarter panels looking up, and you could see the rust up there where the blaster stopped, and then all the rust on the quarter panels that I couldn't spray in fear of warping it.
So if you look up in there, there's rust coming through on the inside channel. We're going to have to address that. It's also going to be easier to do a full quarter install, but I'll go through that on a whole separate video depending on what the owner chooses. Either we'll be putting quarter skins or full quarters on the car. The main thing for me though is we know just from that picture that this whole area, everywhere the Sandblaster didn't go, all the way up is full of surface rust. We don't know what the inner structure is inside these cars, and I've cut enough of them apart at this point, especially the Mopars, it seems like, that the whole inner structure sometimes is rotted, rusted away. And you would never know because the outer skin doesn't look that bad, especially in the southeast. I feel like the cars with the humidity kind of swell from the inside, and it seems to be a little bit worse. This was a northern car, so it's got surface rust on it, but it's not that bad. For instance, another thing too, this frame rail, we can't get inside this frame rail, so we're going to just do a spray and pray down there best we can. Another thing too, unless you sand something, that epoxy needs that tooth according to the TDS sheet to be able to adhere to. So you can't just spray anytime you want. I mean, you can, but there's a good chance that it's not going to do anything and come apart. So anything we can't sand or get to, it's kind of hard to just spray in there. Another thing on this car that I was talking about the owner constraints, for instance, I would have probably replaced this rocker panel, the inner and outer rocker panel together. Personally, if it was my car, I think it would have been easier. We probably wouldn't have had to peel up the floor over here, and then I could install the inner outer rocker one piece separate. So there's certain things that I think that's a lot of shops don't put their stuff online because we're kind of bound by constraints. The idea behind my shop is I'll never do anything that's unsafe or put out butchery work. I will try to stay within the owner's constraints and kind of give the owner the best value for his dollar. So we kind of go back and forth on the owners and me. Some owners have different budgets and everything else. I don't know the history on the car, but that's just something that everything you see on this channel, just be aware there's not always exactly how I do it if it was my car, but it's the proper way to do it and give you an idea at home. So stay tuned. Let's go ahead and spray this car and get the epoxy started. We're in our induction period.
So here we are, we're going to start spraying the car. The reason I started at this part right here is I got a good camera angle. I could show you the speed that I'm going without doing the time lapse on it. So this is real-time speed right here. Pick a pattern. You see I'm doing a 50% overlap where my wet edge is feathering over the wet paint. You really don't want to be painting over paint that's starting to dry unless it's completely flashed over. Stay in a pattern. Don't paint yourself in a corner. You don't want to be halfway in the car and realize you got to climb out over wet paint. So be aware of your surroundings when painting. And then this is practice to just try to keep everything in even, consistent flow. It doesn't matter on the epoxy, but if you get down to metallics and certain base coats, the more coat, or especially candies, if you're not consistent on how you paint, it's just gonna darken or make the different panels that you're painting actually look like a different color. What I do really like about painting or priming over blasted metal, I feel it really holds the primer a lot better and I can be a lot heavier on it. If we just smooth this whole exterior panels, you probably see me gliding over them a lot faster and laying my first coat a little bit thinner just to get a good tacky chemical bond for our second coat that I'll be a little bit heavy on. But with the Sandblast, it really puts a mechanical strong tooth that you can lay your first coat on really heavy.
All right, I took the mask off real quick. I know it's real, got a bunch of paint fumes in here, but I wanted to go over one more thing I didn't talk about. Basically, we're putting 2 coats on this car just to make sure we clean, get all the spots and everything, we don't miss anything, and it's just that extra thicker coat for protection. Now, you need to make sure the paint, the primer, flashes over before you put the second part on. What that basically means, you can see how it's kind of still shiny in a lot of these areas right here at the end of the frame rail we did. But if you look at this area that we shot earlier, it's got that dull look to it. That's what you want. You want to make sure this is basically dry. It's flashed over, which means it's basically removing all the solvents and activators and breathing out. If you compound this on, it's not that it's just going to take longer to dry. You're trapping in your first layer of solvents and everything, and that could cause issues and delamitation down the road. So when you spray it, you keep a wet edge, which basically I'm doing 50% overlap. You can adjust the fan and everything for that. You let it flash out 15, 20, 30 minutes. It all depends on humidity and weather. So once you do that, you go out there and we're going to spray our second coat. All right, now we got the car all done with the primer. Let's go ahead. I'm going to show you how I clean my gun. If you're doing it at home, might not be exactly the same, but follow along with the process and it might help you out. So we're going to remove our cup adapter. Now we got lacquer thinner in this cup right now. That was our mixing cup, and so I put the lacquer thin in there. It's got a little bit of paint in the bottom, but we'll go ahead and soak our parts, and we're going to take the gun, the cup that came with the gun now, and we're going to run a little bit of lacquer thinner through it. I had the tip loose because I was messing with the spray pattern. So right there is how to adjust your vertical and horizontal spray pattern if you didn't know. So we'll go ahead and spray a little bit of lacquer thinner in our waste bin. You can see it's coming out the color of the paint. Now I'm going to hook it up to air hose too and spray the rest of it out over there. Now that that's out, we're done with this cup. Let's go ahead and disassemble our spray gun. Go ahead and take the main tip off. Now, we're on a 1.5 nozzle. That's going to show how much epoxy primer base coat's going to be applied on the gun. Your TDS sheet is going to tell you what they recommend for that material. So double check with that. Taking the tip off here. Everything that we're taking apart right now, we'll go ahead and put right into epoxy. We're going to leave the fan spray alone. We're going to remove the nozzle tip right there, the spring, and the other part of the nozzle. You can see we got paint on it. So let's go ahead and remove our regulator. At this point, we'll go ahead and with this, if you have one of these, this all can be discarded. So that's garbage. Now, what we're gonna end up doing, don't dip your gun with the seals and the airline. You really don't want your lacquer thinner going in your air nozzle. So all in all, basically, this is a spray it down the gun. I'll show you. We'll spray it down with lacquer thinner. And we're gonna take some paper towels and we're gonna just start cleaning it. And we're gonna spray in the gun nozzle. Like I said, we're just gloves, key here too, and we're gonna just start wiping that down. I'm gonna just do a quick wipe down. I'm gonna come back through for a video time's sake and speed it up. Same thing with this area. Basically what you do a quick spray and you just keep wiping it down, okay? Now, these parts, same thing. Once they come out of lacquer thinner, just go ahead and wipe them down. The one thing you're gonna wanna do is, here's a spray gun cleaning kit, and you got these little pins. You wanna go through, after you spray these parts, you can do the same thing. And the tip, right there, you can spray this through the center and around the sides. And then what I'm gonna do, I'll go through with the right bore size and just clean these out. You just do that and then reassemble your gun and you'll be good to go. So let me finish cleaning this gun. Hopefully that helped. We'll come back through and we'll kind of do a quick walk around on the car once it dries and talk about a couple things on the future, what we're doing with it and where we're at right now. All right, wrapping up this video, you could see the epoxy has dried. We'll do a quick walk around. You saw in this video, I gave you some tips and tricks on laying down some primer. You know, I've been painting cars when I was 16, 17 years old. You ask my friends, we put 30 layers of paint on a dang car, but never the right way. So ever since me and my wife been together, we've been together about going on 20 years now. She's the painter out of us. You can see her stuff back here. Airbrush artist and everything. So I've been really lucky that I haven't had to paint anything. So I'm in the process learning myself. She'd probably be a better job teaching this video, but she's not one to get in front of the camera. So saying that, hopefully these tips and tricks helped you. The Charger, I think it really looks good. We'll do a quick walk around. You can see the engine bay is completely done with epoxy. The inner fenders are done. If you look back here, we got all the tape removed too, and you could see our where our weld through primer was laid down. This doesn't have to be perfect too, and there's some areas we're gonna have to go back up to, maybe weld, scuff, and reapply some primer. But for the most part, this is just more efficient for us to just lay down the epoxy, get that area sealed off. There's a couple areas we'll have to come back through here and fix too, same thing. So again, there's not any major runs, but this isn't a show quality job. This is mostly for protection, especially in the inner rocker areas where they didn't lay any epoxy. This is really gonna protect. You can see we haven't done anything on the roof yet and this inner structure. I couldn't blast here because with risk of damaging all the panels on the outside. So I haven't gone over with the owner what he wants done. I know he didn't want the external body parts sanded down yet. I still have to talk to him about the inner structure and whether we're going to use OSFAR or what the rust conversion is. So we'll get that to in the future. But you see the firewall compared to what it looks like came out really good. Looking back here at the frame rails, we did 2 coats on everything. So it should be sealed up. It should last for years to come. You can see we still have some frame rail patching in these corners. There's a couple holes we'll go through. So all that's going to have to be fixed. But where we're at right now, I got this charger. You see, I keep them really high. The frame jig, like I said earlier, is leveled out. This is where the car will stay until it gets finished building. The reason it's high is because this car needs mostly floor work. I'm a taller person and I like to work without hunched over all the time. So that's why the car's like this. And when we come back, we're going to start putting the new pieces on. We're going to start with the inner rockers. We're going to get the torsion bar support. We're going to do some other frame rail pieces and work our way up to the floor pans and just start building from the base up on the car. What we're going to do while we're gone, we're going to do a bunch of patchwork. I know the rockers have some patches, the frame rails have some patches. We're pretty much going to take this car front to rear and kind of analyze it and look with a fine-tooth comb now that we blasted it and just start cutting out small patches and doing the metal work there. I'm probably not going to take you along for that just because it's real tedious and real boring, but when we come back, the fun stuff should happen. I believe we have all the parts for the car right now. And so as soon as the patchwork gets done, we'll come back to it. I hope this video helped you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you in the right direction that, you know, when you get a car and you cut it all out, if it's on a frame jig, we could sandblast it and you put it in the epoxy and then now we can touch it. So if it helped you, share, comment, like, subscribe to our channel. We're going to try to put out some more videos on a constant basis of just this project, other projects, and maybe you learn a little something for it. Thanks for all that do give constructive criticism, feedback, and all that. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.